Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here. My name is Gosia Smieszek-Rice, and I'm Deputy Secretary of the Arctic Monitoring and Assessment Program. And it is my great pleasure to welcome you to this session on confronting the Triple Planetary Crisis, Arctic Nordic Global Perspectives that we are organizing together with the Nordic Council of Ministers, very fittingly in this pavilion. I think also that this discussion greatly builds on the excellent previous session that we've just listened to about the global tipping points. And as many of you probably know, the triple planetary crisis, the concept that has been coined by United Nations Environmental Program, it truly relates to the interconnected nature of three major crises that we are facing: the climate change, biodiversity loss, and pollution in all its forms, from plastics to waste and so on. The issue of this crisis is that they amplify one another. Which means that we cannot anymore tackle them in isolation. We truly need integrated solutions, and that's the discussion that has started a few years ago, and that we are hoping is picking up just now as we need it most. So this is partly the point of today's discussion, so that we can listen to the speakers from the United Nations Environment Program, from the Nordic Council of Ministers, from the Sami Council representing Arctic indigenous peoples, and also from Arctic Monitoring and Assessment Program. I don't want to take any more time here since we are a few minutes late, but it is my great pleasure that we have with us here today Martin Krause, who is Director of Climate Change Division of United Nations Environment Program. Martin, the floor is yours.
Good morning. The heat is encroaching even in the Nordic Pavilion. We can all feel it, right? I have to do like this. Thank you. Exactly. These are the instructions. So you can hear me? Yeah, it's okay. Yeah, I'm glad to be here. Thank you very much for inviting me and for opening this session. In the United Nations Environment Program, we have framed the triple planetary crisis as a crisis of biodiversity loss, pollution, and climate change. And as Gosia already mentioned earlier in the introduction here, these crises are interconnected, and we're becoming more and more aware of that interconnectedness. Talking about the state of the global environment is challenging, but it's also an opportunity to focus on the urgent need and the growing momentum for change. And change begins with realizing that these three crises are interconnected. The way we organize the global dialogue is often very fragmented and happening in a very vertical way. We know we have the conventions, catering to biodiversity, to climate, to land, pollution, plastics. All of this is organized in a very vertical way. What we are missing is the horizontal connections, and this is what we are going to talk about here. You all know that last year, 2024, was the warmest year on record. You might also, if you have followed the launch of the emission gap report, which was done about 5 days ago, that we have breached the 1.5 degrees Celsius. We are living, in other words, in an overshoot world, as we call it now. There are other statistics that I can cite, such as 66% of the ocean area is impacted by human activities. 90% of the world's marine fish stocks are fully exploited, overexploited, or depleted. 75% of the Earth's land surface has been significantly altered by human action. Humanity is producing more than 430 million tons of plastic annually. 2/3 of that is becoming waste, filling the oceans, and often working their way into the human food chain. All of these, and we can go on with the statistics, and many of you are very aware of these statistics. All of this underscores the importance of the choices that we make today, of the actions that we take today. At the same time, I can also report to you some positive outcomes, such as the decline in persistent organic pollutants thanks to the Stockholm Convention, and the growing action to restore ecosystems. Around the world, important policies are being implemented to tackle the environmental challenges. There is a momentum and a clear recognition that we need to act. And you know that in this COP, we are trying to move away from negotiations and from talk into implementing actions and solutions. These challenges that I have mentioned, they are deeply interconnected, and the drivers of change often reinforce one another, making coordinated, effective responses more important than ever before. Now, coming to the Arctic, the cryosphere, the glaciers, the Arctic is a prime example of where these interconnected issues can be observed, and they are more visible than anywhere else. This audience here knows better than any other that the Arctic is warming 4 times faster than the global average. The resulting changes profoundly affect the Arctic people and their ecosystems, with cascading consequences for the rest of the world. These interconnected issues that we are talking about here cannot be dealt with as single issues anymore in a vertical way. And by the way, it's not only the conventions that have kind of driven us in thinking about and acting in a vertical way. It's also the financial mechanisms. We have the vertical funds. We have the funding windows that are separated, from biodiversity, land, climate, and climate is split into mitigation, adaptation, and so on. This is kind of a system that we have created over the last 20, 30 years. And we need to break that system to a certain degree. We need to break it to look more at the synergies and in the horizontal ways that these crises impact on ecosystems, on people. And here we are talking obviously about the Arctic, the cryosphere, and so on. So how do we move forward? Let's start with what we already have. And these are to implement the existing commitments with innovative solutions and the funding that is ready to go. And then, yes, let's connect the dots. Let's integrate the data and the knowledge to unlock the new insights and the co-benefits. We call it in UNEP the co-benefits, right? When we do a climate project, we want to look not only on reducing emissions, we want to look at the impacts that it has on the climate adaptation agenda, on biodiversity, on land, and also, very important, the socioeconomic co-benefits. What does it do to people? So in terms of solutions, we need to put indigenous people and local communities into the spotlight, because they are the custodians of the traditional knowledge, and they are also among the most vulnerable groups that are affected by the Triple Planetary Crisis. Tested nature-based solutions do exist and have been identified through a number of platforms and initiatives, such as the Panorama, the Adaptation at Altitude Solutions Portal, and there are a number of very good publications on this very topic. It is now time to invest from different sources, from the vertical climate funds, from the public sources, as well as the blended finance, and from some locally led schemes to transfer and to scale these solutions. The Arctic is ideally placed with the various working groups, the science, the traditional indigenous knowledge, the multi-stakeholder forums, to collectively analyze the integrated problems and to implement those integrated horizontal solutions. The Arctic region, fora and stakeholders are ideally placed, in our view, to integrate and to co-create and to assess what the best solutions are, and to also look at these multiple co-benefits. In a way, we believe in UNEP, the Arctic can provide an example in that sense to the rest of the world. We have, in a month from now, UNEA, which is the United Nations Environment Assembly. This is where all the environment ministers and all the stakeholders across the world are coming together and trying to advance the global environmental agenda. And we hope that this forum will help us to defragmentate, to get rid of that kind of fragmentation that we have across the multilateral environmental agenda. UNEP is the host and the platform for 17 MEAs, multilateral environmental agreements. And we need to bring those better together when it comes to actions on the ground. Member states are currently deliberating a draft resolution on the preservation of glaciers in the broader cryosphere. This has been proposed by Tajikistan and will be up for debate at the UNEA Assembly in a month from now. And we hope that we get momentum behind that kind of resolution. There is a growing political momentum to safeguard and protect emerging ecosystems that undergo rapid changes due to cryosphere loss. For instance, post-glacial ecosystems play a vital role in mitigating. You all know about the albedo effect. We have been publishing about that for quite some time. You know about the adaptation to climate change challenges, to guarantee access to fresh water, to halt the decline in biodiversity. Despite the importance of these systems, they are still little recognized in nature conservation policies, including actions in terms of the governance to preserve these. Now, coming to the end of my little opening here, the creation of protected areas would, in our view, guarantee some level of integrity and functionality of these key ecosystems and limit the growing anthropogenic threats. Talking about protected areas in the cryosphere, in the Arctic. And the threats are coming obviously from mining, from tourism, from important measures in support of implementing these various goals and targets of what is enshrined in the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. UNEP is a partner, and UNEP stands ready as a global partner in alignment with these mandates that are provided by its member states in the context of the UNEA resolution, of our midterm strategy, of our work program. We stand ready to support you to address these environmental impacts of the planetary crisis. So I'm very happy to be part of this session here and also to listen to my colleagues and to advance this common agenda that we have. Thank you very much.
Is this working? Thank you very much, Martin, for this excellent introduction. And I think it is very fitting that moving from the global arena, the next presentation will be actually on how this action starts being taken on a regional level in the Nordic region. Because in the Nordic region, with the Nordic ecosystems, we face exactly the three challenges that we are discussing here. But also what I find so interesting is that now in the latest Nordic cooperation program on environment and climate, that just now started this year and that will go until 2030, the Triple Planetary Crisis is at its center. So it is my great pleasure that we have Anna, who is the senior advisor with the Nordic Council of Ministers, to tell us more about that. Thank you.
Let me see if I have the grip right. Is this good? You can hear me? It's very unfortunate that our Secretary General, Karin Elleman, couldn't be here today. I'm stepping in for her, and that's a great pleasure, of course. But believe me, she tried all she could. There were even rumors that she was trying to hitch a ride with a wealthy millionaire on a private jet, but flight chaos came in between, so sorry for that. Anyway, I'm happy to be here at this important event on the triple crisis of climate change, biodiversity loss, and pollution. And just moments ago, under the lead of Jessica Seddon, there was a very interesting event on tipping points. And that dialogue touched upon the both urgent and deeply relevant different tipping points that also affect the Nordic region, like the risk of the AMAP ocean stream actually collapsing. or the loss of Greenland ice sheets. And also you touched upon how regional policy institutions could help anticipate and respond to such threats. So that conversation leads us directly into this session, because the Triple Planetary Crisis, as was already pointed out by UNEP, it's not about climate change only, it's also about how climate change interacts with biodiversity and with pollution, and creating feedback loops that amplify risks and negative impacts. And the Arctic is a prime example, because the melting ice, shifting ecosystems, and accumulating pollutants that originate far from the region are not isolated phenomena, but are interconnected signals of a system under big stress. And I will try to share what we in the Nordic countries and the Nordic Council are doing to address the Triple Planetary Crisis. And only 2 weeks ago, the Nordic Ministers for Climate and Environment gathered in Stockholm for a kickoff, we called it, towards this COP30. And the message from that meeting was very clear, that the Nordics are committed to science-based climate action, to multilateral cooperation, and to leading by example. And the ministers, they adopted a declaration that reaffirms the Nordic countries' shared ambition and highlights the urgency of coordinated responses to the triple crisis. Already pointed out, deserves to be repeated. But this is, of course, not only a Nordic conversation. The triple crisis is global, and solutions require global partnerships and global cooperation. And the Nordic countries are trying to contribute in ways that can inspire and complement global efforts. So they work actively through, for example, UNEP and the EU and the Arctic Council. And these are all state-level commitments. And then we, at the Nordic Council of Ministers, we play a role in coordinating regional action and in amplifying Nordic leadership internationally. And the triple crisis, as pointed out by Gosia, it serves actually as the foundation for our environment and climate agenda now and for the years to come. And we have no less than 16 dedicated programs where we aim to integrate climate, biodiversity, and pollution. And there comes the microphone back. The grip is good? Yeah, okay. But we also provide direct support to international frameworks, like international conventions. We support, for example, work under the UNECE Air Convention to advance pollution control and link it to climate and health aspects. And these initiatives are also complemented by policy science dialogues that connect researchers and decision makers, and ensuring that knowledge guides our choices. So ambition in the Nordics and globally, we know, unfortunately, falls short of what the triple crisis demands. And I think that now it is time. What am I? Oh, it's this hand. Why didn't you tell me before? They were making some funny gestures over there. And I think that since we fall short of what the triple crisis demands, it's time to show some leadership. And leadership is not defined, as you know, by certainty, but by the ability to listen, learn, and to lead with purpose. And purpose in this way means acting together across sectors, across borders, and also be guided by science. And I say guided by science, but I think also that we must recognize that we live in very uncertain times, and we may need to act also in uncertainty. I mean, it's a known procrastination strategy to say we need to know more, so we may need some more research here in another commission and another whatever group. And we actually had yesterday a very interesting conversation here in this pavilion between Professor Johan Rockström and Professor Alexandra Antonelli. And Johan Rockström pointed out that I think a few scientists now mean that it's a 1 to 10% possibility, but risk that the AMAP stream actually collapses in this century. And of course, 1 to 10% is not certainty, but it's a too big risk to take to not act. We do not need to, as we very often do, to sit and wait, or to wait until we have completely exhausted a system or a resource to start thinking new. I mean, Stone Age did not end because we were lacking stones. And I look forward to continue this important conversation during this session. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Anna, also for stepping in on a short notice for Karen. And the discussion about the triple planetary crisis, but also no discussion about the Arctic can take place without the Arctic indigenous peoples. So it is great pleasure that we have with us today here Gunbritt Retter, who's head of environment unit in the Sami Council. Importantly, for those in the audience who are not familiar, Sami Council is a voluntary Sami organization that promotes rights and interests of Sami people in 4 countries where Sami live, in Finland, Norway, Sweden, and in Russia. And actually very soon, Gunbritt, please correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it will be coming to its 70th anniversary, which also means that Sami Council is one of the longest organizations in the world acting for indigenous people's rights. So, Gunbritt, please.
Yeah, Gito, thank you. When I wandered with my mother on our homelands, she constantly talks about the land around us while we are walking, passing on the knowledge she heard from her mother and aunt. She talks about the weather conditions last spring and reasons where the berries are most likely to be found and where there are probably no berries. She describes the route as we go, not instructing, not checking if I listen, just sharing and repeating the same every time. Placing the responsibility on myself to pay attention, which I probably did less so as a kid, but more attention and more so as I matured and realized I might get lost when I must find the way on my own. Well, I wouldn't get lost in Varjat, but I would get lost in not finding the best places to pick berries. In our area in the northeast Norway, Varjat, a decade-long invasive climate change-driven birch larva attack have affected the berry growth and distributions. My greatest worry, though, with this is not the decade. No, the greatest worry with this is a decade of breach in knowledge transfer between generations. In his master thesis, Biudit Luosa, to ask for salmon, Sami scholar Aslak Holmberg writes about the young salmon fisherman Aslat. Aslat has learned from the elderly that Guelli galgabistet suddasis suddasi, which means the salmon you catch should last from the time the river freezes until it opens again. If you have salmon left, which you caught last summer, when a new fishing season begins, then fishing luck will not stand with you. Then you either have taken too much fish or you have shared too little. To fish for salmon is in northern Sami biudit luosa, but the word biudit can also mean to ask for salmon. A key lesson in Sami culture is that you should not ask for more than you need. This summer, it was the 3rd season that salmon fishing in Diatno River was banned, as well as ban or strong restrictions fishing for salmon in the fjord. Salmon species is struggling not only due to overfishing, but during the time in the ocean, both in Sapmi and in Alaska. Reindeer herder Engleryd was given her own calf and her own reindeer mark when she was 6 years old. It was the proudest moment in my life, she says. She got the reindeer earmark that mirrored the one of her Akka, grandmother. And this has created a strong relationship and a special and strong community between Akka and her. When she marked her first calf in her own reindeer mark, she knew that this calf and the herd that would come from it over time would be her responsibility. She learned its colors, its qualities, and of course, reading and cutting her earmark. It was her responsibility that the calf became a good reindeer, that it had good food and was safe from danger in the reindeer grazing area, so that it would continue to provide their family with a livelihood. And she was only 6 years old. And you might think that these people I refer to are elders. They are not. They are all much younger than me. So this is not a story of the past. It is still the values and the ethics and the worldviews of us as Sami indigenous peoples. And I also meant to say that reindeer husbandry is challenged by climate change, changing the lands. They are challenged by predators and fragmentation by never-ending industrial projects searching for climate solutions. The stories illustrate the worldview, values, and beliefs rooted in indigenous peoples' knowledge and cultures, and the reciprocal relationship between our people and the land and waters. Indigenous peoples' way of life protect nature, not only in the Amazon, but in the Arctic as well, and Nordics, as well as in many regions or most regions around the world. And then more to the question, Gosia. Climate change is a challenge in itself, and I don't need to repeat that message. And Sami livelihoods have a good competence in dealing with changes in nature. Nature-based industries or economies, we deal with changing conditions in weather, wind, and surroundings all the time. But what we see in our lands is that climate change is also leading to a massive change in the way the land in Sápmi is used. Sápmi continues to be a source of resources targeted by governments and outside capital. And the Nordic states, and I'm referring to Norway, Finland, Sweden, the states answer to reduce greenhouse gas emissions is to fast-track wind industry, to fast-track mining for minerals needed for batteries. And in this way, the response to climate change causes further nature destruction. And which was said earlier, we are looking into things in silos. But also, my greatest concern is that solutions is exaggerating the pace of the loss of nature. So the Gordian knot to solve addressing the triple planetary crisis is how to move into low-emission society, getting off fossil fuels and reduce emissions of greenhouse gases, transit to alternative energy sources without placing the burden of this shift on indigenous peoples. That is without further, and to do this without further nature destruction, and without compromising cultures that has kept the ecosystems intact. All these aspects become an issue of our human rights as indigenous peoples. So systemic change is required to secure Sami participation in decision-making processes. Consultations and early dialogue are important, and we have mechanisms for that in the Nordic legislation, but that is not enough. We also need to find other ways of applying, for example, free, prior and informed consent as a space for creating solutions together. And I think I end there, not to leave some time for questions and discussions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gunbrid. Yeah, here, Rolf. No, you can go there. Yeah. All right. So the last person taking stage before we move to the discussion is Rolf Rodven, who is the Executive Secretary of AMAP. And we have this presentation here because next to indigenous knowledge, we've heard from other speakers that, of course, science plays a critical role here. And yesterday from this stage, the Arctic was named the ground zero for all these crises. Arctic Monitoring and Assessment Program is the working group of the Arctic Council that for over 30 years has been assessing the state of Arctic environment. So, and it is perhaps nowhere clearer than in our reports, the connections that we see. And Rolf is going to say a few words about that. All right, Rolf.
Thank you, Gosia. Well, I'm going to address what kind of role can the Arctic have when it comes. Sorry, what kind of role does the Triple Planetary Crisis have when it comes to the Arctic, and what kind of example can the Arctic play for understanding the crisis and the way to move forward? In a couple of minutes, so without slides, so please buckle up. So as we already heard today, there's no place warming as fast as the Arctic, 3 to 4 times as fast as anywhere else in the world. And to me, the most important thing is, since the beginning of 2000s, we have moved from about 1/3 of the year in the Arctic being below freezing temperatures to almost a half now. And for those who do not believe me when I say that water in its liquid form and water in its frozen form just really differ on the way you have to address the climate, try to walk a river on thin ice in spring. It really makes cascading effects through the ecosystem. Likewise, when it comes to contaminants, Arctic has had a very specific role. Animals or contaminants that of concern in the Arctic tend to bioaccumulate. That is, the concentration increases throughout your lifetime because they don't leave your body. But also they magnify. So the concentration of top predators like lobster skulls or polar bears are much higher than those on the lower levels in the food web, like plankton or fish. This has also brought forward some of the most important regulatory measures, like, for instance, the Stockholm Convention and Minamata Convention, which was established upon Arctic data, as we heard earlier. But also, when it comes to a biodiversity loss, and I would write about endemic species, because a large part of those animal species living in the Arctic are endemic. You don't find them anywhere, and they can't move any further. Even if you fish a bottom-dwelling fish, it's a major difference being off the coast of Canada or Svalbard on a 50 meters depth, being pushed forward by invasive species or temperature rise to the Arctic Ocean, where it drops down to 22,700 meters, 3,000 meters depth. It makes it hard to survive. For instance, ivory gulls, a bird, has already dropped, the population have dropped to by 80 to 90% of what we had 20 years ago. It's really, the species are disappearing, and they're disappearing on a global scale. However, these 3 crises do not act in silos, as we already heard. And climate change is now a major driver for the changes we've seen. Conventions have been very successful at reducing contaminants, but what we see now, and it's a very neat study from 2017, where we saw polar bears suddenly have an increased species in a body. Why? Because the regulatory measures were very successful. Well, what it showed out was, due to the ice melt, polar bears stopped feeding ice-dwelling seals to harbor-dwelling seals, which had a higher concentration. This feed range shift, increased their concentration of PCBs. We see similar things now. PCBs being deposited on glaciers over years are now mobilized due to glacier melt. Mercury in permafrost is mobilized due to permafrost thaw, and we see the levels increasing in nature. The good thing is increased regulatory measures can help this. And we see that throughout, not only for polar bears, but for several of the Arctic species, that climate change increase the concentration of pollutants. So what does it tell us? Well, I would like to say a polar bear do not care about formalities. A polar bear faces climate change, invasive species, hunting pressures, new diseases, disturbance due to increased tourism, and so on. And it's the sum of all these things and their interactions that matters. And maybe also the way you have to think about conventions is about the sums and interactions and how we might need to address them across the conventional work to allow ourselves to set the thresholds depending on whether it's under a high warming scenario or low warming scenario, on a high disturbance scenario or not, in the way we move forward. So I think that's okay. Thank you.
Excellent. Okay. Thank you very much, Rolf, also for being so brief and going without slides. Really appreciate this. So if I can invite all the speakers to the stage, Martin, Gunn-Britt, and Anna. And mindful of the time, I might just have a question or two to to you, and then we open the floor for questions from the audience. But Martin, perhaps I could start with you, because it was very interesting when you said, well, that in a way we created this system over the last 30 years that at this point feels like it locked us into siloed thinking, and now our next steps is to start breaking those boundaries. And I wanted to ask you, how do you perhaps see the next steps in taking this move? Like, how can we start building these bridges that we need, but also what are the challenges that you see moving forward? And
it's always easier to talk about the challenges and the problems because they lie in front of us. We can see them. We are kind of living with the challenges, right? The challenges when it comes to what I call the vertical versus the horizontal way of thinking and acting. The challenges are, as I have said, that conceptually we have been designing a system that goes vertically deep but does not go horizontal. So since Rio, when we have set up the 3 Rio conventions, and subsequently more treaties and more conventions and multilateral agreements came about, they were all very valid in the sense that we're tackling a problem, from the policy level, the regulatory level, the capacity building level, the financing level, and they were all kind of constructed in that way. Now, I think we are at a point, is this working, right? Yeah. We are at a point where we realize that we need to connect the horizontal dots. So that is our challenge. How can we do this? I would say we have an opportunity when it comes to mandating, when we apply for funding from the vertical funds, from the MDBs, mandating that we also highlight the co-benefits, right? That funding is not only being awarded by highlighting that there is a climate mitigation, a greenhouse gas emission reduction benefit, an adaptation benefit, a biodiversity benefit, but at the same time that we also need to prove when we submit a proposal for funding that there are co-benefits. That would be an incentive for those who are in the business, and UNEP is one of those agencies in the business of helping countries to apply for funding from all kinds of funding sources that are available out there. That is an incentive for member states and for us to look across and connect the dots. So demanding such co-benefits in our funding proposals that are being submitted would be, I would say, a first step to break out of the verticality and to embrace the horizontality.
Excellent. Thank you. And Anna, perhaps moving from this once again from global to regional level. So you highlighted how now the Triple Planetary Crisis becomes the core of the cooperation program. And it's, if I could ask you, well, how do you see it moving forward? So we are now, would this be translated to funding calls, the co-benefit approach that was mentioned? How can we put this into practice moving toward the 2030?
No, does it work? Wow, this is difficult. I'm sorry, Gosia, but I had difficulties in actually hearing the question. It's a bit difficult, but I think that you asked how we can help advancing the agenda. And I would like to say that, I mentioned earlier that the Triple Crisis is the core of our work on climate and environment now. And through these 16 dedicated programs, we hope that this can be a contribution. And I would like to make some advertisement here for this little postcard that you can get from outside here or from Christina sitting there. Go on the back side and scan this, and you can see what all these programs are working with. And they are really trying to integrate, as we are talking about, these strategies into, integrated strategies and try to break this silo way of thinking. Another policy brief that you know about, that you can also read about if you this little postcard from out here. But enough advertisement. May I say something that is may not maybe not a response to a question, but another question. I think that we talk a lot about, and I couldn't agree more, that of course we need to stop working in these silos and we need more integrated strategies. It's easier said than done. I have a background from the UNEC Air Convention, and we really tried to work, especially with the Climate Convention. It is very difficult. There are a lot of negotiation streams and a lot of work going on, and we all have limited time. But that doesn't mean we should not try. But I would like to say also that we need actually better coordination and a closer dialogue between scientists and policymakers, because an important challenge here is that we simply do not use the science in the best way to make policy. And the UNEC Air Convention actually has a different way of working than the Climate Convention. In the Air Convention, we have 40-something technical and scientific groups, and they sit in the convention. They are part of the convention structure, which means that there's a constantly ongoing dialogue between scientists and policymakers. And the scientists are part of all the policy meetings in the Air Convention. I think that would be a useful concept to try also for other conventions, working more like they have the scientists outside sending messages in. Sorry to talk for long there.
No, that was excellent. Thank you so much. I wanted to ask if there are perhaps any questions from the audience to speakers. Jessica? Am I? Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity, and thank you for the panel. So the last session we had was actually, in some ways, I think Anna said it well, about creating the science within the policy, like UNEC, but for tipping elements. But I had some questions for Gudrun, actually. I was struck by 3 points that you mentioned. One was that it was your responsibility to listen to your mother, and you listened more as you grew up. 2 was that the wisdom to not take more than you need. But 3, most importantly, was the need for systemic change in order to have Samis be fully involved. So I'd like to ask, what kind of systemic change would bring Sami knowledge and wisdom into a UNEC-like structure for climate risk? What could the tipping element, what could what would be the first steps?
Thank you. They have to see which microphone I'm using. Yeah. Thank you for that question, and that can maybe I can merge that with a question Gosia maybe ask me later. And for the first time in my life, I hope I am a dot, and that the Sami indigenous peoples is a dot on that horizontal line that you are talking about, and not a dot floating around somewhere out of sight. So that was one comment. Yes, I'm glad you picked up exactly that. My point is that we still have those responsibility. We still take responsibilities. This was on a personal level, but as a culture and people, like other indigenous peoples, we do take responsibility for our surroundings, our waters, our land, and then as part of the wisdom is there still. It's not broken. It's not gone away. But we are quite invisible on these maps, if you notice. The answer is the systemic change. I think Martin used the word transformative change, or maybe it was from a panel yesterday. But part of the transformal change which we need is what I said, to go beyond the meaningful dialogue or beyond consultations. We need everyone to understand that there are rights that cannot be ignored. And these rights apply no matter what must be, and must be respected. So the process must be based on the fact that legal frameworks exist, which limits the actions governments can. So this is to say that they have to respect these legal frameworks. So indigenous peoples need to feel safe, and free, prior and informed consent process will create safe spaces for us. I also consider that free, prior and informed consent is a safety net for indigenous people and a means for meaningful participation. And we need to look at the free, prior, informed consent, not as a mechanism to veto, which is a national state's biggest concern, but to look at it as a platform for exploring solutions where everybody, all right holders, are participating and are heard. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Gunn-Britt. I think we might be coming to the end of this session, and I think for everyone in the audience, this happens so often in Arctic discussion that Gunn-Britt usually has the last word. So it was also the case here, and rightly so. But I think if I could just share two words here at the end. I think one of the aspects was, Martin, I was actually struck that it was the title of the UNEP report that really put Triple Planetary Crisis at the center was Making Peace with Nature. And I just liked really a word peace, that it was brought there. That was one thing. From Gunn-Britt, from you, when you were sharing this story with your mom, I think there was also a point about languages and about the culture. That we haven't talked about this much, but I think preserving this, remembering the importance of indigenous languages, what they teach us, what they carry, I think that was also something that maybe doesn't fit in the concept, but I think it is so underpinning to so many of these discussions. Anyways, when it comes to the concept of the triple planetary crisis, I need to say where I find its hope and potential is also that it really brings together solutions which are not coming at the costs of other sectors. So that we look for solutions that are not pushing climate from climate to biodiversity loss, that would be compromising biodiversity when we are trying to protect the climate. But it's not only about not pushing things from sector to sector, but also making sure that solutions that we find in the north, that they don't create burden in the south of this world, but vice versa as well, that whatever comes from the south doesn't end up in the Arctic, as we've seen in the past, with a very serious pollution in the region. And last but not least, I think there is also the point of not creating extra burden for future generations. So it's not only from pushing things from this to the next one. And I think I would like to thank you all so much for taking part in this panel, and I really hope that's not only the conversation but action that will continue, and we'll look forward to it. So thank you all.